Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first Fisheries Forum of 2021. Unfortunately, of course, it's a virtual forum. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, we'll be back to running normal forums and we can all get together. My name's Phil Rippon. I'm the Fisheries Technical Specialist for the area, and I'll be running you through the presentation. So this talk's going to be an update of the work that we were involved with last year, and also a look into what we're going to be doing this year. So thanks for your time, and I hope you enjoy it, and please feel free to ask some questions at the end. Okay, so for this Fisheries Forum update, I'm going to talk about some staff changes that have been made across the Fisheries team. We'll have an overview of our work in 2020, which of course has been a challenging year, as I've already said. I'll include in this update projects, a quick update from our enforcement team, an update on our stocking programs that we've managed to carry out this year, and there'll be a short update on fisheries monitoring as well. And then we'll move on to a forward look, so what we're planning to do this year in 2021 and moving into 2022 as well. In terms of staff changes, many of you will know Mr. Freer. Paul left us, retired from the agency in December after I think almost 40 years of, or maybe more than 40 years of fisheries work with EA and its various predecessors. So Paul obviously is going to be a big miss to the team. Here he is, one of his favourite fish, the sea lamprey. I think that will be on the River Weir at Chesley Street, I would imagine. I hope I've got that right, it looks like it. Myself, I'm still here, Phil Rippon, Fisheries Technical Specialist. An old picture of me when we did some work looking at the cucumber fish, or the smelt, on the Tyne estuary, which was fascinating to find those fish at the time. So yeah, I'm still here, and my job is to provide technical leadership to the team and to the area on all matters relating to fish stocks and the fish that we have a particular remit for. Natalie Wallace is our fisheries officer for Northumberland, but she has now taken on the Tees catchment as well, so she has a wider role than she had before. This picture of her stocking, I think, some skimmer bream into Killingworth Lake. Neil Cook, Neil, experienced officer. Many of you will know Neil. He's the Tyne catchment officer for fisheries, but he has now also taken on the Weir as well. So when you have questions relating to those catchments, these are the guys who you initially would speak to. This is Morton Heddle-Cowie. No, he's hiding behind his virtual reality mask. I think he was doing some. He was operating a remote vehicle, I think, a remote underwater vehicle looking at the net fishery. That particular job. Morton's role is the index officer. I think that's his correct title for the River Tyne. So he has a responsibility to deliver quite in-depth data, to write reports for various international organisations such as ICES and NASCO, and to report on the state of fish stocks, that's migratory salmonid stocks, salmon and sea trout in the Tyne catchment. John Shelley. John is the team leader, so he's the guy who makes sure that we are all doing what we need to do. John has recently been involved in a number of secondments, but his substantive team substantive role in the team is team leader. He's come back from work looking at the implementation of the salmon and sea trout bylaws. He's also been working on restarting activities following the COVID pandemic. So yeah, it's a busy time. At the Kielder Salmon Centre, this is Richard Bond, who is the hatchery manager. Richard has been with us with the agency for a long time now. I can't remember how many years exactly, but previous to that, Richard was a guide up in the fishing guide up in the Isle of Lewis before moving into the aquaculture sector. So he has a role not just in being an expert in delivering baby salmon, if that's the right expression, but he also has to look after the general upkeep of the building, the salmon centre. It's a visitor centre, so members of the public attend the centre, and there's lots of responsibilities around building management that Richard, as well as rearing fish, has to occupies his time. Sasha Taylor is the assistant manager, so she's up at Kielder as well. Sasha has a variety of roles before coming into the fisheries team. Perhaps most interestingly, before her time in the agency, she was involved in running a lobster hatchery. So she's moved on to fish now rather than crustacea. But, yeah, so Sasha's based up at Kielder as well. Dr. Ben Strachan, he's the technical specialist for the freshwater pearl mussel project. So Ben has a challenging role to re-establish this endangered species. That's the freshwater pearl mussel up in the North Tyne and on the Reed in particular. He also has a remit to look at land management use to make sure that all the aspects relating to the health of freshwater pearl mussel are considered. That's siltation, that's general land management. So he has a wide-ranging role, as well as the captive breeding program that he runs up at the hatchery. So that's a captive breeding pearl mussel to try and re-establish the population. Okay, so I just want to quickly run through a few of the things that fisheries have been involved with in 2020. Something that is perhaps forgotten about, and it's bread and butter stuff, but it's important that we regulate the way releases of water are made from Kielder Reservoir, particularly in relation to water quality in the Tyne estuary. Now, this was very relevant in 2020, and I'll talk about this in a bit more detail later, but it was the driest spring that was ever recorded, which has knock-on effects for water quality. And relating to that, we also carried out our first ever extra release to aid smolt migration, so that's salmon and sea trout smolts. So that was carried out in May 2020. Again, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on. With our partners, we've delivered and funded 7 fishery improvement programme projects and 5 water and environment improvement fund projects. I'm sorry I've got the words slightly wrong, but yeah, so that's a significant piece of work to deliver some improvements of fisheries across the area. A separate project was a project which was delivered through the Revitalising Reedsdale project, again another fishery improvement project. Fish stocking, in 2020 we stocked out 174,000 salmon, 27,000 plus trout that was part of the freshwater pearl mussel project again. We've also supported still water and rivers with stockings of coarse fish in 2020. Again, I'll give a bit more detail on that later on. Of course, we've continued to regulate fisheries, particularly in line with the salmon and sea trout protection bylaws, where the most vulnerable stocks of salmon need to be protected. We've continued to keep our fish passes as clear as we can during the difficult year that we've had. But generally speaking, we've kept the fish moving through our own fish pass assets, and where we've noted blockages on other assets, we've informed the relevant parties to try and keep the passes clear, bearing in mind of course, the difficulties that everybody has had in carrying on their work in 2020. And of course, in order to do any of this work, we've had to ensure that all of the controls were in place so that any essential field work and our other activities could be carried out safely. So that was a very important part of anything that we did, and everything, and indeed everything that we do at the moment. Continued need to be incredibly careful and vigilant about how we carry out our work. Yeah. Well, recently we've collected 20,000 salmon eggs, so that's despite all the difficulties around in the safe working practices that we are under at the moment. We've working closely with Canal and Rivers Trust and other partners such as the Tees Rivers Trust to develop some new fish passage options at the Tees Barrage, and we're also looking to improve the existing fish passage arrangements, and also there has been improvements to the way fish can be monitored at the Tees Barrage, so that's all been quite positive this year. And of course, construction has carried on largely throughout the last 12 months or so, and a big part of our job, it's sort of the bread and butter and it's the day job, but we have to regulate all the applications that come in. We have to issue permits for people who want to work in estuaries, in rivers. Our role is to make sure that fisheries and the general environment is protected while allowing society to continue. So it's always a difficult job, but very important that fisheries are protected. Our fishery enforcement team has continued to carry out its essential work. We have continued to provide an instant response through these difficult times. So please, remember to keep ringing in if you see pollution incidents, if you suspect illegal fishing, or if you see illegal fishing, use that number 0800 80 70 60. It's a free number and it's 24 hours, so yeah, ring it in, because if you don't ring it in, nothing will happen. We've continued to support range of habitat and passage improvement projects, as I've mentioned, through WEEF, through WEG, the Water Environment Grant, and through any other funding sources that become available, which they do from time to time. I'd like to talk specifically about one of our roles last year, which was more, well, it's always important, but last year we had, if you remember, one of the driest, well, it was the driest actually, spring on record, certainly within the Tyne catchment. It was also the sunniest as well during the first lockdown. Now, which is great, and some fish species quite thrive in those sort of conditions. But salmon, and particularly in the Tyne estuary, will have a problem if there's low flows and if there's high temperatures. This graph, if you bear with me, it shows what we call the oxygen deficit in the estuary. So if you look at the bottom axis, it runs from January all the way through to the end of 2020. Now, where that line goes above the red line is the danger area for salmon, and that isn't a time when previously dead salmon have been observed in the estuary. So when that oxygen deficit gets above that 0.3 on the scale on the left hand side, that's when salmon can start to die in significant numbers. Now, what we've done in probably in the last 10 to 15 years is being able to model this. We've been able to predict when these problems might occur. So what we've done is we've requested extra releases of water from Kielder Reservoir. Now, those extra releases of water don't make any difference to the water quality or the oxygen deficit in the estuary, but what they do is they move fish. So fish that have been sat in the estuary, salmon and sea trout that have been sat in the estuary for a long period of time, will move on quite a small release. It only needs to be around about 10 cumex, and you'll get fish moving out of areas of low oxygen concentrations. So we've been doing that for quite a number of years now, requesting these extra releases at the right times. And thankfully, and I'm not saying it'll never happen again, but thankfully there hasn't been any salmon deaths for quite a number of years, or at least there hasn't been any significant salmon deaths that we know about. So it's been quite a positive, but every week we have to look at the model. Every week we take flow information, temperature information from our remote monitoring sites, feed it into the model, and then we can decide whether we need to request a release or not. Linked to the driest spring that we ever had on record, we also decided to do an extra release in May to enable smolts to better migrate and leave the River Tyne. It's well established that survival of smolts improves with in wetter springs, so it would make sense, particularly in such a abnormally dry spring, that an extra release could have been trialled, and that's what we did. Okay, moving on to fishery enforcement in 2020. These slides have been provided to me from my enforcement colleagues, so many thanks to them. During the first COVID lockdown, there was a major rise in reports of angling activity, and also linked to that, offending, of course. But despite early restrictions on how we could operate, our enforcement officers did attend major incidents, and a number of illegal nets were seized. That was in April and May. We've had to increase our collaboration with enforcement partners, so obviously such as the police, the IFCAs and the port authorities. So there was a more coordinated way that we could all work together. That was quite successful in 2020. In June, there was a full restart of enforcement activity. So there was high visibility enforcement patrols, hotspots were targeted, and perhaps not surprisingly, there was then a dramatic reduction in both offending and reports of offending. Joint rural crime initiatives and operations were carried out in our police constabulary areas throughout the second half of 2020, and a PR campaign was also instigated, which has helped to deter offenders in the latter part of the year. Of the work that the enforcement team were involved with, top left is collaborative work with the police force. The middle picture shows an illegal net being retrieved from Sunderland, I believe, the Weir estuary, around there anyway. Interestingly, some of the fish on the top right hand side that came out of retrieved from that net, mullet, which is an interesting fish, which I didn't even know were in the Weir estuary, but so I learned something from that. Sea trout and other sea fish were recovered from that illegal net. Bottom right is an illegal crayfish trap that was recovered. Bottom left shows our enforcement boat on one of its patrols leaving the Weir estuary. So some of the successes from the enforcement team, they successfully targeted some of the angling hotspots. Offenders were reported, illegal activity was reduced. The police provided information that enabled us to process more angling offences from across the northeast. Numbers of suspects were apprehended, equipment was seized. There's a few examples there at Ryhope, Escombe, and at Durham. Some cross-border joint operations were carried out with our colleagues in Yorkshire area and the respective police forces. 14 illegal nets were seized alongside prohibited instruments and some crayfish traps. And we carried out joint operations with the police targeting fisheries offending in Durham, Cleveland and Northumberland, and this included 4 arrests. And of course boat patrols, we could start those again, and those were carried out within the coastal fishery. Okay, moving on to another source of delivering fishery improvements, and that's the Fisheries Improvement Project. So in this year we have completed 6 FIP projects. This is money, of course, that comes directly from rod licenses. It's a small pot of money, but it does enable us to deliver some very worthwhile bits of work. It does rely on partners contributing either in kind or with cash or bringing some financial support to the project. So it's important to remember that when you see a list of the projects that we're involved with. Okay, so once we've delivered this year, a coarse fishery called Tilcon Pond. There's been some access improvements and some fishing pegs and platform improvements at that particular pond. Hebron Lake, we've contributed towards improving access at Hebron in Northumberland, another coarse fishery. Tylery Pond, another angling access project further south in the region, which we've been happy to contribute towards. Also a project with the Tyne Rivers Trust, looking at some fish passage improvements on the River East Allen, which has some good stocks of trout, and it's quite an interesting little fishery. The River Team Fisheries Habitat Improvement Project, again looking at improving an urban stream, a River Team, which does have some quite nice habitat and has stocks of trout, which we're looking to improve. Likewise, the River Nent, another fishery improvement project, again looking at habitat and fish passage improvements on a small river up on the South Tyne, which again has some surprisingly good trout stocks in there. Okay, just a few pics of some of the projects I've just described. This is Tilcon Pond, showing a new access track, a new fishing platform, better access for angling. It's interesting angler there, well, mannequin obviously, which I guess is there to scare off the cormorants in the winter time. So yeah, a nice project to get involved with. This is a obstruction which was found on the River Team as part of one of the walkovers. So these are things that until you get out there and have a proper look, we're not even sure what's causing problems with fish and fish passage. So this is one obstruction that can be added to our list of things that need to be remedied. Okay, now this is an interesting one. This is at Tylery Lake. Now this was, you can see in the back of the truck there, that is the new clubhouse for the fishing club. That's been installed next to the lake. It's recycled porta cabin. So again, a nice little project to get involved with to help support that particular fishery. Another source of funding which is used for fishery improvements is called WEIF, Water Environment Improvement Fund. This is money that comes from the agency, but is usually delivered by partner organisations, often the Rivers Trust that deliver WEIF projects. Now these projects are usually centred around water bodies that aren't performing as well as they could under the Water Framework Directive, so that they're water bodies that are failing for fish, where they should have more fish than what they have at the moment, and these projects are designed to start to try and address what we call fish failures on certain water bodies. Okay, so a number of these, a few examples. The Fish for Tees project, which is looking at a selection of barriers on the lower tees mostly to try and improve fish passage, and that includes some appraisals and designs for those particular fish passes. I think they're on places like Skelton Beck, Langley Beck, for example. This is a project which has been led by Tees Rivers Trust. So yeah, a very worthwhile project, opening up or potentially opening up a lot of water for fish. The Team Catchment Improvement Project, that goes hand in hand with the River Team walkovers, so that can take forward some of the identified issues from the walkovers to try and improve the River Team for its particularly for its trout stocks. Foxton Burn, a project with Northumberland Rivers Trust, and there has been two major fish passage improvements on that particular burn, and I'll show you a picture of that a little bit later on. Coquet Catchment Barriers, another project from Northumberland Rivers Trust, where we worked closely with the Trust, identifying barriers, and the Trust coming up with some potential solutions. They've done a very detailed assessment, not just the main river, pretty much all of the tributaries, and come up with some really useful information. Now that can be used to drive some future projects on the Coquet. Beachburn Beck Habitat Improvement Project, that this time is a partnership with the Weir Rivers Trust. Beachburn Beck runs into the River Weir, goes through Crook. It's quite a significant stream. It should have reasonable trout, even some salmon in the lower end of the burn, but it does have problems with access, with old weirs, and particularly with a long culvert which goes through Crook. So again, we're looking to do some future work on that beck, which would have big improvements for juvenile fish, and particularly, I would have thought, sea trout and trout would benefit. And a project with the Tyne Rivers Trust, another obstructions project, looking at some tributaries on the South Tyne, looking at barriers and hopefully delivering solutions. Of the reef projects that I've just talked about. Here we have the Beachburn Beck, which is a culvert that runs through Crook, which, as you can see, is pretty horrible habitat for fish, terrible for fish passage, no opportunity for fish to spawn. So that's a project with the Weir Rivers Trust that we're hoping to eventually make that burn much more fish friendly. This is for Foxton Burn. This is obviously a ford crossing, a new ford crossing, which has much bigger pipes, which enable fish to pass quite easily upstream. Previous ford had a single pipe, much smaller, which constantly blocked and was an absolute nightmare for fish passage. So a big improvement, and that one delivered with our partners in Northumberland Rivers Trust. This is an example of some of the problems on a river Team. One of the big culverts, I think this is up at Causey. Again, difficult for fish passage and something that we'd like to address. A major project was carried out. This is on the River Alm. Now this was under a different funding stream called WEG, Water Environment Grant, which was a one-off payment to improve WFD status, so that's the Water Framework Directive status. Now this again was a major project delivered again by the Northumberland Rivers Trust. It's done a great job during 2020 in installing and refurbishing fish passes on the River Aln system. There's a lot of old fish passes which were either broken or in a really bad state of repair, or were of a type that could only pass certain fish under certain conditions. Now, these have been replaced with more modern style fish passes, and as well as refurbishing some of the existing fish passes which weren't in too bad condition. So I think there was 5 in total that are being delivered by the trust. They've done a fantastic job to get these fish passes up and running. So yeah, another great project. These are our coarse fish stockings that have been carried out in the past 15 months or so. I won't go through them all individually. You can see the different places that have benefited from stocking of different fish species. Mixture of still waters and a few rivers throughout the area, giving a good mixture of species. Picture of some of the fish. I think these ones were going into Dissington maybe, like crucians and rudd maybe. So yeah, some great quality fish. These fish have come from our fish farm, the agency's own fish farm at Calverton. Picture of dace, I think, going into, I think that was to the Clowbeck. Now, the Clowbeck has suffered a number of pollution incidents in recent years. We're still trying to restore stocks to that particular watercourse. So that's received dace this year. I just wanted to do a little bit about license sales, and future of angling. That sounds a bit grand, but it's really about how things have changed in the last year, bearing in mind the situation that we've all been in, and how fishing was still able to carry on despite the COVID situation. So we did have quite big increases in license sales in 2020. So many people, of course, took advantage of angling as one of the pursuits that was deemed as healthy and safe during much of the COVID pandemic. Nationally, our coarse and trout licenses they went up by about 17% on the previous year, so that's a substantial rise. Those figures are to the end of November last year, so it actually probably would have been a little bit more than that. There was also a 13% increase in new anglers, which is interesting. So new anglers meaning unique licenses, so hadn't been issued before to that particular person or address. So that quite often was anglers coming back into the sport who hadn't fished for quite a long time. So a lot of these increases were people who decided, oh, I want to go fishing again. Some of them would have been brand new anglers, of course, as well. So that's good news for the sport as a whole in these sort of difficult times. The only slight downside, and it's only a very small decrease, was that the migratory salmonid licenses actually went down a little bit by 1.6%. Maybe, although it's a matter of some debate, maybe that's to do with the availability of salmon angling or the demographic of salmon anglers. That's maybe one to debate. So there was an extra £2.4 million came in from the extra license sales, and that money has been reinvested in fisheries, so that was good. It could go back into fisheries. In Northeast area, our own sales went up by about 14%, so not far off the national average, very close. Monitoring in 2020, as you can imagine, it was severely impacted by restrictions due to COVID. So yeah, we have collected some counts, but they are limited and they were quite sporadic during 2020. Understandably, only essential fieldwork was being carried out for large periods of the year. What counts we have are still available, and if you want to have a look at what we did collect, go to the Gov website and search for fish counts, and you'll find them very quickly. So yeah, we did miss a lot of counts. This is from our electronic resistivity fish counters, which count salmon and sea trout essentially on the tine, weir and tees, but due to the fact we couldn't maintain the counters, we have lost some data from 2020. But what was quite clear and continues to be clear and has been the same for a number of years now is that the summer run has become a dominant run. It wasn't that long ago that September, October, November were the times when there were big runs of salmon and sea trout, but that's certainly changed. It's a summer run that seems to dominate at the moment, and that's a pattern not just in the northeast of England, that's up in Scotland and throughout the east coast. Anyway, as a result of missing some of this monitoring data, which is unfortunate, but couldn't be helped, of course rod catch data will be much more important and will be used more for stock assessment purposes. Unfortunately, no electrofishing was carried out in 2020, and also no hydroacoustic surveys from the Tees Barrage were carried out. These are things that will and hopefully will resume and not too far into the future now. So there is an electrofishing program planned for this year. We're hoping also to do some hydroacoustic work at the barrage. So things are looking up on the monitoring side. Having said all of that, we were able to gather some data, and that was from our underwater footage, which continued to record throughout the period. So Morton's been having a look at some of that data, and I'll show you a little bit of that in a moment. This is underwater footage from Riding Mill in August. I'm just going to play this for you. Now this was a big shoal of salmon coming through on a particular day. There was one fish with a damaged tail there. It's probably the seals had a bite at it. But it's a lovely run of fresh salmon, probably grills, coming through on that particular day, which again was towards the end of August. Interestingly, you can see on the backs of the fish these little white patches. Those are sea lice. So those fish are freshly out of the sea. They haven't taken long to reach the Riding Mill monitoring station. This is footage from when we did the smolt release, which is great that we managed to retrieve some data from that period as well. If you look carefully, you'll see the smolts migrating on that little bit of extra water. It was literally, I think it was 9 cumex, which is a very small amount of water, but enough to move the smolts and get them migrating downstream. That's something that we can consider in dry springs in the future. Just to show that we don't always just see salmon and sea trout, quite often see other fish species. These fish are too small to trigger the counter, but they're observed on the video. So this was a big shoal of dace. I can't recall exactly when this footage was taken, but not uncommon to see some shoals of coarse fish. It's a significant shoal of dace moving up through the counting area at Riding Mill. So good to see those fish as well. I've been talking for quite a while now. Let's have a quick look at what we're going to be doing. Well, obviously we're going to continue to work with our partners. We're going to develop some more fisheries projects in 2021. We'll examine all the different possible routes that we can use to deliver these projects. So that includes a fishery improvement programme, the Water and Environment Improvement Fund, and there'll be other routes as well that I've not mentioned or will actually develop as the years go by. We'll develop some new fish pass projects where we can and where it's appropriate to do so. We will of course continue to enforce our fisheries legislation, and we will prevent and prosecute illegal fishing. We'll continue to operate our fish counters and we'll maintain the Index Rivers programme. Our bread and butter, we will keep reviewing activities of industry, of new infrastructure, the activities of water companies to make sure that fish stocks are always protected. But within that, we'll look for partnership opportunities as well. We'll carry on supporting fish stocking programs, and we'll also keep supporting some of the fishing surveys and the competitions that we've traditionally supported. So that includes the Tyne and Tees Championships and a smaller survey that we carry out on the North Tyne. But of course, we continue to need everyone's help to do all the jobs that we want to do. So please, keep reporting to us any pollution incidents you see, any illegal fishing that you need to tell us about. Use that number, that 0800 number. So that's 0800 80 70 60, and then keep working with us to develop some future projects and share your ideas with us, and then that will help us to move forward as well. Anyway, I think that's enough from me. I hope hope you haven't all nodded off, and hope you're still listening and have a few questions for us. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, take care, everybody. Thank you.